After 8 years of military service and a medical discharge following an IED explosion, Maya had sought solitude. The nightmares still came most nights, vivid flashes of combat that left her drenched in sweat. Her grandmother's cabin, nestled deep in the pines, was meant to be her sanctuary, a place to heal away from the well-meaning but painful questions from civilians who could never understand what she'd seen. She hadn't expected company, especially not the kind with 4 paws and eyes that would change everything. The howling wind masked the sound at first, a desperate scratching at the cabin door, barely audible through the blizzard's fury. Former Army Ranger Captain Maya Winters reached for the knife she kept beside her bed, her scarred hand steady despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. Maya approached the cabin door, listening intently. The scratching had grown weaker, more sporadic. Whatever was out there was losing strength. Taking a deep breath, she flipped on the porch light and cracked open the door, knife positioned defensively. The sight that greeted her wasn't what she'd expected. Collapsed in a growing pool of crimson against the pristine snow lay a husky, its fur matted with blood and ice. The dog raised its head weakly, revealing unusual steel-blue eyes that seemed to pierce through Maya's carefully constructed walls. "Hey there," she whispered, her voice rusty from disuse. The dog whimpered, attempting to stand before collapsing again. Maya hesitated only briefly before her combat medical training kicked in. She carefully lifted the animal, surprised by how light it felt despite its size. The dog didn't resist, instead seeming to melt against her as if finally able to relinquish its last reserves of strength. Inside, Maya worked methodically, the familiar rhythm of emergency care, temporarily pushing aside her own demons. She cleared the kitchen table, laid out clean towels, and gathered her first aid supplies. The husky watched her with those intelligent blue eyes, barely flinching as she examined its wounds. "You've been through it, haven't you?" Maya murmured, gently parting blood-soaked fur. What she found made her jaw clench. The dog had clearly been attacked by another animal. Deep puncture wounds suggested a larger predator, perhaps a wolf or mountain lion. But there were other injuries that sent a chill down Maya's spine. Perfectly straight cuts, almost surgical, and what appeared to be burns. These weren't from nature. These were inflicted by human hands. "Who did this to you?" she whispered, meeting the dog's gaze. She noticed a worn leather collar, nearly hidden by matted fur. Carefully cleaning away the blood, she made out a single word etched into a small metal tag. "Ghost." "Ghost," she repeated, and the dog's ears twitched slightly. "Fitting name. You appeared like one in this storm." Maya continued cleaning and treating the wounds, applying antibiotics and bandaging what she could. Throughout the process, Ghost remained unnaturally still, as if understanding that Maya was helping. As night deepened, Maya made a comfortable bed for Ghost near the fireplace, using old blankets. She brought water and softened some beef jerky in warm water, the only suitable food she had on hand. The husky accepted the offering cautiously before exhaustion claimed him, his eyes finally closing as the fire cast dancing shadows across the cabin walls. Maya settled into the armchair nearby, unwilling to leave the injured animal alone. "Whatever you're running from," she told the sleeping dog, "you're safe now." The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd come to this isolated cabin to run from her own demons, and now found herself providing sanctuary to another wounded soul. Sleep came in fitful bursts for Maya that night. Each time she woke, her eyes immediately sought Ghost. Around midnight, she noticed the dog had shifted position, facing the window that looked out toward the dense forest. Even in sleep, his ears twitched at sounds Maya couldn't hear, and occasionally a low whine escaped him. By dawn, the storm had intensified. Maya stoked the fire and checked Ghost's bandages. The dog seemed marginally stronger, accepting water and more food, but his attention remained fixated on the window. When Maya drew near, Ghost's tail thumped weakly against the floor, a gesture of trust that touched something long dormant within her. "Going to check the perimeter," Maya told him, falling into military jargon without thinking. She bundled up against the cold and made a quick circuit around the cabin, looking for tracks or signs of whatever might have attacked Ghost. The fresh snow had obliterated any evidence, a white blanket concealing whatever secrets lay beneath. Back inside, she found Ghost had managed to stand, though his legs trembled with the effort. He limped to the window again, pawing at the glass and whining. "There's nothing out there but snow and trees," Maya told him, but Ghost's agitation only increased, his claws scratching against the window frame as he attempted to communicate something beyond Maya's understanding. Throughout the day, the pattern continued. Ghost would rest, then gather his strength to stand at the window, always facing the same direction, deeper into the forest beyond the cleared property line. By evening, Maya couldn't ignore it any longer. Something had happened to this dog in those woods, something that left both physical and psychological scars. "I know about those," she said quietly, sitting beside Ghost and gently stroking his fur. "The kind of wounds that don't show on the surface." That night, Maya dreamed of explosions and gunfire, of the faces of soldiers she couldn't save. She woke gasping, sweat-soaked despite the cabin's chill, to find Ghost standing beside her bed, his cold nose pressed against her hand. The dog's presence anchored her to reality, drawing her back from the edge of panic. "Thanks," she whispered, and Ghost settled on the floor beside her bed, his watchful gaze aimed at the door as if standing guard. The blizzard raged for another day, trapping them in the cabin together. Maya attempted to contact local authorities about the injured dog, but found her phone had no service, and her satellite phone's battery was dead. She'd forgotten to charge it since arriving, having wanted to disconnect from the world entirely. Ghost's strength returned gradually. By the third day, he was able to walk around the cabin without trembling, though he favored his right side where the deepest wounds were still healing. His behavior, however, grew increasingly urgent. The pawing at the window became more insistent, accompanied by soft barks that seemed deliberately restrained, as if he feared being too loud. "What is it, boy?" Maya asked, kneeling beside the agitated animal. "What's out there that has you so worked up?" Ghost turned to look at her, and Maya could have sworn there was an almost human intelligence in those blue eyes. He limped to the door, then looked back at her expectantly. "You want to go out? In this?" She gestured to the window, where the storm had finally begun to ease, though the snow still fell steadily. Ghost barked once, decisively. Maya hesitated. She'd come to the cabin to be alone, to avoid complications and connections. Yet in just 3 days, this wounded animal had somehow breached her defenses. There was something in those eyes she recognized. Determination, purpose, even through pain. It was the same look she'd seen in soldiers who pushed through injuries to complete their mission, to save their comrades. "All right," she said finally, "but we're doing this my way." Maya packed a small backpack with emergency supplies. First aid kit, protein bars, water, flashlight, matches in a waterproof container. She changed into thermal layers and waterproof pants, laced up her insulated boots, and strapped on a hunting knife. After a moment's consideration, she took her hunting rifle from the locked cabinet, checked it methodically, and slung it over her shoulder. Whatever had injured Ghost might still be out there. "Ready?" she asked, and Ghost stood at attention by the door, his posture suddenly alert despite his injuries. As Maya opened the door, the cold air rushed in, but Ghost didn't hesitate. He stepped out into the snow and immediately headed toward the tree line, looking back to ensure Maya followed. "I must be crazy," Maya muttered, securing the cabin before following the determined husky into the silent, snow-draped forest. The forest enveloped them in hushed stillness, the fresh snow dampening every sound except the crunch of Maya's boots and Ghost's lighter footfalls. Despite his injuries, the husky moved with surprising speed, frequently pausing to make sure Maya kept pace. They pushed deeper into the trees, leaving the cabin's safety far behind. Maya maintained her situational awareness, mentally marking their path and watching for landmarks. The military training that had become second nature served her well now, each sense heightened and alert. Ghost seemed to be following a specific route, his nose occasionally dipping to the snow before continuing confidently forward. An hour into their journey, Maya noticed something odd. 3 parallel scratch marks on a tree trunk, too uniform to be natural. She approached, examining the marks closely. "Someone made these," she murmured, tracing the indentations with gloved fingers. Ghost barked softly, as if in confirmation, then continued walking. 20 yards later, Maya spotted another tree with identical markings. Trail markers, she realized. Someone had deliberately created a path through this seemingly trackless forest. The light began to fade as they ventured deeper, the winter day drawing to a close with alarming speed. Maya checked her watch. They'd been walking for nearly 2 hours, and the temperature was dropping rapidly. "Ghost, we need to head back soon," she called. The dog paused, looking at her with what seemed like frustration before continuing even more urgently. "Hey," Maya quickened her pace to catch up. "Whatever you're leading me to, it might have to wait until tomorrow. It'll be dark soon." And she stopped abruptly as they crested a small rise. Beyond the next stand of pines, thin wisps of smoke rose into the gray sky. Ghost barked, tail wagging for the first time since Maya had found him, and increased his pace toward the smoke. Maya followed more cautiously now, her hand resting on the rifle strap. The smoke suggested a cabin or campsite. Someone else was out here in this remote stretch of wilderness. As they drew closer, the trees thinned, revealing a small clearing. In the center stood a dilapidated cabin, almost invisible under snow and overgrowth. If not for the smoke curling from the stone chimney, Maya might have mistaken it for abandoned. Ghost's entire demeanor had changed. His ears were forward, tail wagging tentatively, but Maya also noted the tension in his body, anticipation mixed with what appeared to be apprehension. "You know this place," she whispered, crouching beside the dog. Ghost whined softly, pressing against her leg before taking several steps toward the cabin. Maya surveyed the clearing with a tactical eye. No footprints disturbed the snow around the cabin. Either no one had left recently, or the fresh snowfall had covered their tracks. The structure itself was in poor condition. The wooden walls weathered gray, one window boarded over, the small porch sagging beneath the weight of accumulated snow. She approached carefully, Ghost now leading with determined steps. They circled to the front of the cabin where a narrow path had been cleared to the door. It was then that Maya noticed something that made her blood run cold. A heavy chain wrapped around the door handles, secured with a rusted padlock. "Someone's locked in," she breathed, realization dawning. Ghost barked sharply, scratching at the door with sudden urgency. Maya knelt by the lock, examining it closely. "Stand back, Ghost," she instructed, reaching into her pack for the multi-tool she always carried. The lock was old and weathered, but breaking it would make noise. She glanced around the clearing again, seeing no signs of anyone nearby, then made her decision. With practiced movements, Maya worked at the lock. Years of military training had taught her various skills, including how to defeat simple security measures. After several tense minutes, the lock gave way with a definitive click. She removed it and unwound the chain, letting it fall silently to the snow. Ghost pushed forward immediately, his nose against the door seam. Maya gently moved him aside, drew her hunting knife, and slowly pushed the door open, wincing at the creak of rusted hinges. The cabin's interior was dim, illuminated only by faint light filtering through a dirty window and the dying embers in a small stone fireplace. The air was stale and cold despite the fire, carrying the unmistakable scent of neglect and something else, illness. "Hello?" Maya called softly, stepping inside with Ghost at her heels. "Anyone here?" No response came, but Ghost moved confidently through the small main room, heading toward a door at the back. The cabin was sparsely furnished, a rickety table with one chair, a shelf with a few canned goods, a worn sofa with springs showing through torn upholstery. A thin layer of dust covered everything except a path on the floor between the fireplace, the back door, and the front entrance. Ghost whined impatiently at the back door, which was partially ajar. Maya approached cautiously, pushing it open with the barrel of her rifle. The room beyond was even darker, a small bedroom with a single window covered by a tattered blanket. In the dim light, Maya could make out a figure on a narrow bed, someone lying motionless beneath several layers of threadbare blankets. Ghost rushed forward, going straight to the bed and whining softly, his nose gently nudging the figure. Maya quickly crossed to the window and pulled aside the blanket, letting in the fading daylight. What she saw made her breath catch. An elderly man lay on the bed, his weathered face gaunt and pale, white hair wild around his head. But what truly shocked Maya was the handcuff securing his left wrist to the metal bed frame. The skin beneath the cuff was raw and scabbed, evidence of futile attempts to free himself. "Sir, can you hear me?" Maya set down her rifle and immediately checked for a pulse. It was there, but weak and irregular. The man's skin felt ice cold despite the blankets. Severe hypothermia, Maya recognized, along with possible dehydration and malnutrition. Ghost licked the man's face gently, whimpering with what sounded disturbingly like grief. The dog clearly knew this person and cared for him. Maya worked quickly, her combat medical training taking over. She found a key ring hanging on a nail by the doorway, and after trying several keys, managed to unlock the handcuff. The elderly man didn't stir during the process, his breathing shallow and labored. "We need to warm him up slowly," Maya told Ghost, who watched her every move. She returned to the main room, stoked the dying fire, and added more wood from a small pile beside the hearth. Then she searched the cabin for additional blankets, water, or anything else that might help. In her search, Maya discovered a leather-bound journal on the rickety table. She hesitated only briefly before opening it, hoping for information that might help the unconscious man. The handwriting was shaky but legible, dated entries spanning months. December 10th, she read quietly. "Victor came today, brought supplies but took the radio again. Says it needs fixing, but I know he's lying. 3 months in this prison now. He thinks I'll tell him where the documents are. I'll die first." Maya flipped through more pages, her concern deepening with each entry. According to the journal, the man, who referred to himself as Samuel, had been imprisoned in the cabin by someone named Victor, apparently his nephew. The dispute centered around mining claim documents that Samuel refused to surrender. The final entry was dated just 3 days earlier. "Storm coming. Victor dropped minimal supplies. Threatened Ghost when he growled. I fear for him if Victor returns. The fire won't last much longer. So cold now. Caroline, I'm sorry I never returned to you." Maya looked up from the journal to Ghost, who had returned to Samuel's side. "You escaped," she realized. "You got away from Victor and went for help." Ghost's blue eyes met hers, and again she had that unsettling feeling of human intelligence in the animal's gaze. A soft moan from the bedroom drew Maya's attention. She hurried back to find Samuel stirring slightly, his eyes still closed. "Water," she said to herself, finding a relatively clean cup and filling it from a bucket by the kitchen area. She carefully lifted Samuel's head, helping him take small sips. "Caroline?" the man whispered, his voice cracked and faint. "Is that you, finally?" "No, sir," Maya replied gently. "My name is Maya. I found your dog, Ghost. He led me here to help you." Samuel's eyes fluttered open, revealing pale blue irises clouded with confusion. "Ghost, he got away. Good boy." His gaze drifted around the room before settling on Maya's face. "You? Military?" Maya was surprised by the observation. "Yes, sir. Army Ranger. How did you know?" A weak smile touched Samuel's lips. "The way you move. My brother was a Marine. Vietnam." His eyes began to close again. "Victor, my nephew. He'll be back. Tomorrow, maybe." "Don't worry about that now," Maya assured him, checking his pulse again. "It was still dangerously weak. I need to get you warm and stabilized. Then we'll figure out what to do about Victor." As if on cue, Ghost's head snapped toward the front of the cabin, ears alert. A low growl rumbled in his throat, the first aggressive sound Maya had heard from the gentle animal. "Ghost?" Maya whispered, instantly on alert. "What is it?" The dog's hackles rose as he moved silently toward the bedroom doorway. Maya retrieved her rifle and followed, every sense heightened. Through the cabin's front window, she caught a glimpse of movement, someone approaching through the trees. "Victor," she breathed, understanding Ghost's reaction. She had minutes, perhaps seconds, to decide her next move. The elderly man behind her was in no condition to be moved, especially not through the freezing forest at night. But whoever was coming had kept him prisoner, had likely been responsible for Ghost's injuries, and would certainly be a threat. Maya positioned herself strategically beside the front door, rifle ready but not raised. Ghost stood beside her, trembling not with fear but with barely contained aggression. "Easy," she murmured to the dog. "Let's see what we're dealing with first." Footsteps crunched in the snow, approaching the cabin door. Maya took a deep breath, steadying herself as she had countless times in combat situations. The door handle turned slowly, and the hunting cabin's fate was about to take yet another unexpected turn. The door swung open, letting in a blast of cold air and the fading twilight. A middle-aged man stepped inside, stamping snow from his boots. He wore expensive-looking winter gear and carried a small pack, his bearded face ruddy from the cold. He hadn't noticed Maya yet, his attention on removing his gloves. The moment his scent filled the cabin, Ghost's restraint vanished. The husky lunged forward with a ferocious snarl, teeth bared. The man recoiled in shock, stumbling backward. "Ghost?" he exclaimed, genuine surprise in his voice. "How the hell?" "I wouldn't move if I were you," Maya interrupted, stepping into view with her rifle held at low ready. "The dog seems to have strong opinions about you." The man froze, his eyes darting between Maya, the growling husky, and the rifle. "Who are you?" he demanded, attempting to sound authoritative despite his obvious alarm. "What are you doing in my cabin?" "Your cabin?" Maya kept her voice neutral, watching his reactions carefully. According to the man handcuffed to the bed back there, that might be debatable. A series of emotions crossed the man's face. Surprise, calculation, then a mask of concern. "My uncle?" he asked, his tone shifting to worry. "You found him? Thank God, I've been so worried. He wandered off during the last storm. He has dementia, gets confused easily." Maya didn't lower her rifle. Dementia patients don't usually need to be handcuffed to their beds. The man, Victor, she presumed, sighed heavily, as if dealing with a misunderstanding. "Look, I don't know what he's told you, but my uncle has episodes. He becomes violent, might hurt himself. The restraint is for his own safety." Ghost's growling intensified, taking a step toward Victor, who edged back toward the door. "Call off your dog," Victor said, a hint of fear breaking through his composed facade. "He's not my dog," Maya replied calmly. "He's your uncle's dog, from what I gather, and he seems to have a pretty clear memory of how he got those injuries." Victor's eyes narrowed slightly. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The cuts and burns on Ghost weren't from wildlife," Maya said, her finger resting alongside the rifle's trigger guard, not on the trigger itself. "Disciplined, but ready. Someone tortured him, recently." Victor raised his hands in a placating gesture. "Look, I don't know who you are or what you think is happening here, but you've got it all wrong. My Uncle Samuel is a sick man who needs care and medication. I come up here every few days to check on him, bring supplies. Whatever he's told you is part of his delusions." "He hasn't told me much," Maya admitted, "but his journal has been quite informative." Victor's expression tightened imperceptibly. "Journal? He's always writing nonsense. Part of his condition." Maya decided to push. The mining claim documents seemed pretty specific for a delusion. Victor's carefully constructed facade cracked. His eyes hardened, and he dropped the concerned nephew act entirely. "You have no idea what you're involved in," he said coldly. "This is a family matter. Why don't you just leave now? Forget what you've seen, and I'll take care of my uncle." "The way you've been taking care of him so far?" Maya challenged. He's suffering from severe hypothermia, malnutrition, and the physical effects of being restrained against his will. As for leaving, that's not happening. Victor's hand moved slowly toward his jacket pocket. I really think you should reconsider. Maya raised her rifle slightly, a clear warning. Don't. But Victor was already pulling a pistol from his pocket. Maya reacted instantly, her military training taking over. She surged forward, using the rifle barrel to knock his arm upward as the pistol discharged, the bullet splintering the cabin's wooden ceiling. In the same fluid motion, she drove her shoulder into his chest, slamming him against the door frame. Ghost leapt into action, clamping his jaws around Victor's wrist. The man cried out in pain, dropping the pistol. Maya kicked it across the floor, then used her rifle as a barrier, pressing the barrel horizontally against Victor's throat to pin him to the wall. Ghost, enough, she commanded, and surprisingly, the dog released his grip, though he remained vigilantly at Maya's side, hackles raised. You've just made a terrible mistake, Victor spat, blood dripping from the puncture wounds in his wrist. I don't think so, Maya replied coolly. Now, here's what's going to happen. You're going to sit down and explain exactly what's going on here, why you've imprisoned your uncle, what these mining documents are, and why they're worth torturing an old man and his dog over. Victor glared but said nothing. Maya increased the pressure on his throat slightly, not enough to choke him, just enough to make her point clear. Fine, he finally grunted. The chair, I'll talk. Maya backed away cautiously, keeping the rifle trained on him as he moved to the single chair by the table. Ghost positioned himself between Victor and the bedroom door, a living barrier protecting Samuel. Start talking, Maya ordered, remaining standing. Victor dabbed at his bleeding wrist with a handkerchief, his eyes cold with calculation. My uncle has something that belongs to my family, documents proving ownership of mining claims in these mountains. Gold was discovered on the property decades ago, but the mine was thought to be played out. New technology has revealed there's at least $20 million of accessible gold still there. And let me guess, you want it all for yourself, Maya surmised. Victor's mouth twisted. It's my birthright. My father was the one who developed the property, who built the original mining operation. Samuel was just a silent partner who contributed nothing but initial capital. So kidnap and torture seemed like reasonable negotiation tactics. Maya's disgust was evident. You don't understand how stubborn he is, Victor snapped. All he had to do was sign over his interest or tell me where he hid the original claim documents. The legal copies were destroyed in a courthouse fire years ago. Without the originals, the claim reverts to the state. With them, the mineral rights are worth millions. And that justifies what you did to him? To his dog? Maya questioned incredulously. Victor's expression darkened. That mutt attacked me when I first brought Samuel here. I defended myself. He glanced at Ghost with undisguised hatred. Thought I'd dealt with him permanently. Should have finished the job. Ghost growled in response, and Maya felt a surge of protective anger. You're admitting to kidnapping, assault, animal abuse, imprisonment, and now attempted murder, she said, nodding toward the pistol on the floor. That's quite a confession. A malicious smile spread across Victor's face. And who exactly are you going to tell? We're miles from anywhere. No phone service. No one knows you're here. He leaned forward slightly. You really should have minded your own business, soldier girl. The taunt didn't faze Maya. She'd heard worse from insurgents in actual war zones. Your uncle needs medical attention, she stated flatly. I'm taking him out of here. Victor laughed. In this weather? At night? The old man wouldn't survive an hour. Face it, you're stuck here until the storm passes completely. And that gives us plenty of time to come to an understanding. A weak voice called from the bedroom. Maya? She didn't take her eyes off Victor. I'm here, Samuel. Everything's under control. Don't trust him. The old man's voice quavered. The documents. He can't find them. Victor stood suddenly. Where are they, you stubborn old fool? He shouted toward the bedroom. Maya immediately raised her rifle again. Sit down. Instead, Victor lunged for something on the shelf beside him. A kerosene lantern. Last chance, he snarled, holding the lantern aloft. Let me talk to my uncle alone, or I burn this place to the ground with all of us in it. You're bluffing, Maya said, but uncertainty crept in. The man's eyes held the desperate gleam of someone with nothing to lose. Try me, Victor challenged, producing a lighter from his pocket. What happened next unfolded in seconds. Victor flicked the lighter, and Maya moved to disarm him. Ghost launched himself at Victor's legs, throwing off his balance. The lantern fell, smashing against the floor. Flames erupted instantly, catching on the aged, dry wooden planks. Now look what you've done, Victor shouted, kicking at Ghost and scrambling toward the pistol still on the floor. Maya had to make a split-second decision. The fire was spreading rapidly, feeding on decades-old timber and kerosene. Victor was diving for the weapon, and Samuel was still helplessly bedridden in the next room. She chose Samuel. Leaving Victor to his desperate grab, Maya rushed to the bedroom, where Ghost had already returned to the old man's side. "We need to move now," she told Samuel, who was struggling to sit up. The flames were already licking at the doorframe between rooms, smoke beginning to fill the cabin. "I can't. Too weak," Samuel gasped, falling back against the thin pillow. Maya acted decisively, pulling a survival blanket from her pack and wrapping it around the frail man. "I'm going to carry you," she explained, already positioning herself to lift him. "Ghost will lead us out." From the main room came the sound of Victor coughing amid the thickening smoke. "You won't make it," he shouted. "Help me put out the fire instead." Maya ignored him, carefully lifting Samuel in a fireman's carry. Despite his age, he was alarmingly light, evidence of the neglect he'd suffered. "Ghost, door," she commanded, and the husky immediately moved toward the cabin's front entrance. The main room was now engulfed in flames, dark smoke billowing toward the ceiling. Through the haze, Maya could see Victor frantically trying to beat back the fire with his jacket, the pistol apparently forgotten in his panic. "The documents," Samuel suddenly cried, his voice stronger than before. "In my boot, left boot." Maya didn't have time to process this. She moved as quickly as she could toward the exit, following Ghost through the smoke. The heat was intense, singeing her eyebrows and burning her lungs with each breath. They burst through the door into the blessed cold of the winter night, Maya staggering slightly under Samuel's weight. Ghost led them several yards from the cabin before Maya gently set Samuel down in the snow, making sure the survival blanket protected him from the freezing ground. A crash from the cabin drew their attention. Part of the roof had collapsed inward, sending a shower of sparks into the night sky. The entire structure was now consumed by flames, illuminating the clearing with hellish orange light. "Victor," Samuel whispered, his eyes fixed on the burning cabin. As if in answer, a figure stumbled from the doorway, clothes smoldering. Victor fell to his knees in the snow, beating at the embers on his jacket. He was alive, but clearly injured. Maya quickly assessed the situation. The fire would be visible for miles on a clear night, but in this weather, with snow still falling lightly, it might go unnoticed. They were at least 2 hours from her grandmother's cabin, and Samuel couldn't possibly make that journey in his condition. Victor was injured, but still a potential threat. "We need shelter," she muttered, scanning the clearing. The fire provided temporary warmth, but within hours the cold would become life-threatening for Samuel. Ghost whined softly, then trotted toward the edge of the clearing opposite the path they'd originally taken. He stopped, looking back expectantly. "You know somewhere?" Maya asked, feeling slightly ridiculous talking to a dog as if he understood complex questions. But Ghost had proven his intelligence repeatedly over the past days. "Woodshed," Samuel said weakly. "Behind. Cabin. Ghost knows." Maya hesitated, looking at Victor, who was now sitting in the snow, clutching his burned arm and watching them with undisguised hatred. She couldn't leave him to freeze, despite what he'd done, but she couldn't trust him either. A solution presented itself in the form of handcuffs, the very ones that had recently imprisoned Samuel. Maya had placed them in her pocket after freeing the old man. "Don't move," she ordered Victor, retrieving her rifle from where she'd set it in the snow. She approached cautiously, weapon raised. "You can't leave me here," Victor said through gritted teeth, his earlier bravado replaced by pain and fear. "I'm not going to," Maya replied, producing the handcuffs. "But I'm not taking chances either." Hands behind that tree. Victor looked like he might resist, but another glance at the rifle changed his mind. He awkwardly positioned himself with his back to a young pine, placing his hands behind it. Maya secured him quickly, checking that the cuffs weren't tight enough to cut off circulation but were secure enough to prevent escape. "Fitting, isn't it?" she remarked coldly. "Now you know how your uncle felt." Returning to Samuel, she carefully lifted him again. "Ghost, lead the way." The husky trotted confidently along the edge of the clearing, following what appeared to be a faint path nearly hidden by undergrowth. About 50 yards from the burning cabin stood a small structure, a rough-hewn woodshed with stone foundation and timber walls. It wasn't much, but it would provide crucial shelter from the elements. Inside, the space was cramped, but dry. Stacked firewood lined one wall, and old tools hung from pegs. Maya cleared a space on the earthen floor, laid down her emergency blanket, and gently placed Samuel upon it. Ghost immediately curled up beside the elderly man, providing additional warmth. "I need to check on Victor and gather whatever supplies I can salvage," Maya explained, ensuring Samuel was as comfortable as possible. "Will you be okay for a few minutes?" Samuel nodded weakly, his hand resting on Ghost's fur. "Been waiting months for rescue," he whispered with the ghost of a smile. "Can wait a few more minutes." Maya returned to the clearing where the cabin was now fully engulfed, collapsing in on itself as she watched. The heat was intense, even from a distance. Victor remained handcuffed to the tree, shivering violently in the cold. "You need to get me out of here," he called when he spotted her. "I need medical attention." Maya approached, assessing his condition clinically. The burns on his arm appeared painful but not life-threatening. His jacket was singed but still provided some protection from the elements. "You'll live until morning," she said flatly. "Unlike your uncle, who nearly died from your neglect." "You don't understand," Victor began, but Maya cut him off. "I understand perfectly. You were willing to torture and kill for money. There's nothing more to discuss." She returned to her pack, which she'd left near Samuel when confronting Victor. From it, she retrieved a foil emergency blanket, which she reluctantly draped over Victor's shoulders as best she could with him restrained. "Once it's light, I'll hike back to my cabin and bring help," she informed him. "Until then, consider this time to reflect on your choices." Victor's eyes narrowed. "This isn't over," he threatened, though the effect was somewhat diminished by his chattering teeth. Maya didn't bother responding. She collected her pack and rifle, then made her way back to the woodshed where Samuel and Ghost waited. The small space had already warmed slightly from their combined body heat. Maya added her own emergency supplies, a small portable heating pad designed for field medical use, activated by bending a metal disc inside. "This will help," she told Samuel, placing it near his core. "Not much, but better than nothing. Thank you," the old man whispered, his eyes clearer than before. "You saved my life, both our lives." He patted Ghost's head weakly. Maya busied herself making the space as comfortable as possible, laying out her spare clothes as additional insulation beneath them. "You said earlier, something about documents in your boot," she asked, remembering his words as they fled the fire. Samuel nodded. "Left boot, inside lining." He gestured weakly toward his feet, which were covered in worn leather boots, cracked with age. Maya carefully removed the indicated boot. The interior lining had been skillfully sliced and resealed. She gently worked her fingers into the opening and felt something. Papers, thin and folded tightly. Carefully extracting them, she found several yellow documents with official seals and signatures. "The original mining claims," Samuel confirmed, watching her face. "Victor was right about one thing. They're worth millions, but not to him." He coughed, the effort clearly taxing his strength. "Half the claim belonged to my partner, Caroline Winter." The name struck Maya like a physical blow. "Winter? My grandmother's name was Caroline Winter." Samuel's pale eyes widened, suddenly more alert. "Caroline? Your grandmother?" He struggled to sit up slightly, staring at Maya's face with new intensity. "The eyes. You have her eyes." Maya sat back, stunned by the implication. "My grandmother owned the cabin where I found Ghost, about 2 hours' hike from here. She died last year." Samuel sank back, a mixture of grief and wonder on his weathered face. "I never knew. All these years, I never knew what happened to her." Ghost whined softly, sensing the emotional shift in the small shelter. Maya's mind raced, trying to process this unexpected connection. "The mining claim," she said slowly. "It was jointly owned by you and my grandmother?" Samuel nodded. "We were young, in love." His voice took on a distant quality, lost in memories. "I went to Vietnam in '68, was reported killed in action, but I was actually captured. By the time I came home in '73, Caroline was gone. I searched, but..." He trailed off, his strength fading. "Rest now," Maya urged, seeing how the conversation had drained him. "We can talk more when you're stronger." But Samuel gripped her hand with surprising strength. "The documents," he insisted. "Half that claim belongs to Caroline, to her heirs, to you, I suppose." Victor knew that. He wanted it all for himself. The pieces fell into place for Maya. Victor's desperate actions, the imprisonment, everything made a terrible kind of sense. The mining claim was tremendously valuable, and with both original owners now elderly or deceased, he had seen an opportunity to take everything. "That's why he kept you isolated," she realized. "Not just to force you to reveal the documents, but to prevent you from ever finding my grandmother or her heirs." Samuel nodded, his eyes closing with exhaustion. 50 years lost," he murmured. "Too late now." Maya didn't respond. She tucked the precious documents securely in her inside pocket, then settled against the woodshed wall, rifle across her lap. Ghost rested his head on Samuel's chest, the animal's rhythmic breathing seemingly synchronized with the old man's. Outside, the night deepened. The cabin fire had begun to die down, leaving the forest in darkness broken only by the faint glow of embers. Maya knew they faced a dangerous situation, an injured elderly man in potentially critical condition, a hostile prisoner, and a long journey back to safety once daylight came. Yet amid these concerns, her mind kept returning to the astonishing revelation. This man had loved her grandmother, had been separated by war and circumstance, had never stopped looking. It was like something from a novel, yet the evidence was literally in her pocket. As Samuel slept fitfully beside her, Maya recalled her grandmother, a strong, independent woman who had lived alone in her mountain cabin for as long as Maya could remember. She had never spoken much about her past, had never remarried. Had she spent all those decades believing Samuel dead in Vietnam? The thought brought an unexpected tightness to Maya's throat. Ghost shifted position, moving to lay his head on Maya's lap as if sensing her emotional turmoil. She stroked his fur absently, grateful for the simple comfort of another living being. "You knew, didn't you?" she whispered to the dog. "Somehow you knew to find me specifically." Ghost's blue eyes reflected what little light remained, intelligent and calm. Maya found herself wondering, not for the first time, if there was something more than animal instinct at work here. Had fate somehow guided this injured animal to the one person who could help Samuel, the granddaughter of his long-lost love? Maya wasn't normally given to such fanciful thoughts. Military training and combat experience had made her practical, focused on survival and tactical thinking. Yet here, in this remote wilderness with a man who had loved her grandmother half a century ago, it was difficult not to feel the hand of something greater at work. The night stretched on, cold seeping into the small shelter despite their efforts. Maya maintained a vigilant watch, checking Samuel's condition regularly, and occasionally peering out at Victor to ensure he remained secured. The mining claim documents felt heavy in her pocket, a legacy she had never known existed, connecting her to her grandmother in an unexpected way. By midnight, the temperature had dropped dangerously. Samuel's breathing had become labored, and Maya knew that despite their shelter, they needed more substantial help soon. Ghost seemed to sense the urgency as well, his attention divided between Samuel and the door, occasionally rising to pace the small space before settling again. "First light?" Maya promised him, her breath visible in the cold air. "We'll get him to safety at first light." But as the hours passed, Maya began to wonder if Samuel would last until dawn. The hypothermia had weakened him severely, and the stress of the evening's events had further taxed his fragile system. They needed help sooner rather than later. An idea formed, desperate perhaps, but possible. Before leaving her cabin, Maya had activated her emergency beacon, a habit from her military days when embarking on potentially dangerous situations. The signal would eventually bring rescue teams, though how quickly depended on the weather and available resources. If they could somehow get closer to her cabin, they might intercept any rescue party. But moving Samuel through the night forest would be extremely dangerous, yet staying might be equally fatal. As Maya weighed these grim options, Ghost suddenly lifted his head, ears perked forward. He rose to his feet, moving to the woodshed door with focused attention. "What is it?" Maya whispered, instantly alert, rifle ready. Ghost didn't growl or bark. Instead, his tail began to wag tentatively. He pawed at the door, looking back at Maya with what could only be described as hopeful expectation. Maya moved silently to the door, listening intently. At first, she heard nothing beyond the normal sounds of the night forest. Then, faintly but distinctly, the sound of voices, human voices, calling out, "Hello? Anyone out there?" Search and rescue. Relief surged through Maya, so powerfully it momentarily weakened her knees. "Here," she shouted, throwing open the woodshed door. "We're over here!" Ghost bolted out, barking now, not in alarm but in greeting, running toward the voices through the snow. Maya followed, rifle slung over her shoulder, waving her arms. Through the trees came the bobbing beams of powerful flashlights, and then figures materialized, 3 people in search and rescue uniforms, accompanied by a 4th in a sheriff's department jacket. "Over here," Maya called again. "We have an injured man who needs immediate medical attention." The rescue team quickened their pace, Ghost circling around them excitedly, leading them back to Maya. "Captain Winters?" one of the rescuers called as they drew closer. Maya was momentarily surprised they knew her name, then remembered the emergency beacon registered to her. "Yes, that's me. But how did you find us here?" "We're miles from my cabin." The lead rescuer, a stocky woman with efficient movements, reached her first. "Your beacon signal combined with reports of a fire visible from the valley. The storm finally cleared enough for helicopter surveillance, which spotted the burning structure." She glanced at the smoldering remains of the cabin. "Is that your place?" "No," Maya explained quickly. "It belonged to a man named Victor who was holding his uncle prisoner there. The uncle is in the woodshed, suffering from hypothermia and malnutrition. He needs immediate medical attention." The rescuers exchanged alarmed glances before the team leader spoke again. "And this Victor person?" Maya pointed toward the tree where she'd left the man handcuffed. "Secured over there. He has some burns on his arm, but nothing life-threatening." The sheriff's deputy immediately headed in that direction while 2 of the rescue team members followed Maya to the woodshed, medical packs at the ready. The 3rd rescuer, a young man with a radio, began coordinating with their base. "We've located Captain Winters plus 2 additional individuals, one requiring urgent medical attention. Requesting medevac if weather permits. Otherwise, we'll need a sled extraction team." Inside the woodshed, the rescue team worked swiftly and professionally, assessing Samuel's condition. Ghost hovered anxiously nearby, watching every movement with attentive eyes. Severe hypothermia, signs of malnutrition and dehydration, possible pneumonia developing, the team leader reported, wrapping Samuel in specialized thermal blankets and starting an IV. "We need to move him ASAP." Outside, Maya could hear the deputy's raised voice as he apparently dealt with a combative Victor. She left Samuel in the capable hands of the medical team and stepped out to check on the situation. The sheriff's deputy had freed Victor from the tree but now had him handcuffed with official restraints, reading him his rights as Victor protested vehemently. "This is all a misunderstanding," Victor was saying as Maya approached. "That woman attacked me. She's trespassing on private property." The deputy looked up as Maya approached. "Ma'am, I'll need your statement about what happened here." "She's lying," Victor interjected before Maya could speak. "She broke into my cabin while I was caring for my sick uncle." "Caring?" Maya couldn't contain her disbelief. "You had him handcuffed to a bed in a freezing cabin. You nearly killed him." The deputy held up a hand to quiet them both. "Let's sort this out properly. For now, sir, you're being detained while we investigate." He turned to Maya. "Can you tell me briefly what you witnessed?" Maya gave a concise summary. Finding Ghost injured, following him to the cabin, discovering Samuel imprisoned, and the subsequent confrontation with Victor that led to the fire. "There are also documents that explain Victor's motive," she added, touching her pocket where the mining claim papers rested. "Samuel was being held prisoner because he wouldn't reveal their location." The deputy nodded. "We'll get formal statements later. For now, our priority is getting everyone to safety." From behind them came the distant but unmistakable sound of helicopter rotors. The rescue team leader emerged from the woodshed, supporting her radio operator who appeared to be limping. "Sprained ankle on uneven ground," she explained. "But the good news is the medevac is incoming. Weather's cleared enough for a pickup." Victor's face contorted with fury. "This is absurd. I demand to speak with my lawyer." "You'll get your phone call once we're back in town," the deputy assured him flatly. "For now, you're coming with us." The helicopter grew louder, and ghost lights appeared in the clearing where the cabin had stood. The rescue team quickly prepared Samuel for transport, transferring him to a proper stretcher. Ghost refused to leave his side, pressing against the stretcher whenever the rescue workers would allow it. "Is that dog injured too?" the team leader asked, noticing Ghost's still healing wounds. "Yes," Maya confirmed. "Victor is responsible for that as well." The deputy made a note, adding animal cruelty to what was clearly becoming a substantial list of charges. The helicopter appeared above them, powerful searchlights illuminating the clearing as it descended carefully, rotors whipping the snow into a temporary blizzard. Two flight medics jumped out as soon as the skids touched ground, rushing toward Samuel with practiced urgency. "Critical transport ready for the elderly male," the team leader informed them. "The prisoner can follow in the ground extraction if the bird can't take everyone." One of the flight medics nodded, helping transfer Samuel to their specialized stretcher. "We can take one additional, the dog's owner," he shouted over the rotor noise, gesturing to Ghost, who was becoming increasingly agitated as strangers handled Samuel. Maya looked at Ghost, then at the deputy who was securing Victor. A split-second decision. "The dog belongs with Samuel," she shouted back. "I'll come too if there's room to keep him calm." The medic gave a thumbs up, and Maya found herself being ushered toward the helicopter alongside Samuel's stretcher. Ghost followed without hesitation, seemingly understanding that they were helping, not separating him from Samuel. "We'll take the prisoner and meet you at Pinecrest Regional," the deputy called to Maya as she boarded. "And we'll need those documents secured as evidence." Maya nodded, holding Ghost close as they settled into the helicopter. The noise was deafening, but the husky remained surprisingly calm, pressed against Maya's leg while keeping his eyes fixed on Samuel's unconscious form. The rotors increased their tempo, and the helicopter lifted smoothly into the night sky. Through the window, Maya watched the clearing shrink below them. The charred remains of the cabin, the tiny woodshed that had provided crucial shelter, the rescue team and deputy escorting a sullen Victor toward what must have been their ground vehicles at the forest's edge. The flight medics worked efficiently on Samuel during the short flight, monitoring his vitals and administering treatment. One of them asked Maya questions about his condition, how long he'd been exposed to the cold, what treatment she'd already provided. "You did good work stabilizing him," the medic commented. "Military medical training?" Maya nodded. "Army Ranger, 2 tours in Afghanistan." The medic gave an appreciative nod. "It shows. Your interventions probably saved his life." Ghost whined softly, and Maya stroked his fur reassuringly. "We both did," she told the medic, glancing down at the husky. "Ghost is the real hero here." The helicopter journey took less than 20 minutes, a distance that would have been hours of dangerous trekking on foot. As they descended toward the lights of Pinecrest Regional Medical Center, Maya felt the adrenaline that had sustained her finally beginning to ebb. In its place came a bone-deep exhaustion, along with a swirl of questions about everything she'd learned: her grandmother and Samuel, the mining claim, the half-century of separation caused by war and circumstance. It seemed impossible, yet the evidence was undeniable. The helicopter landed on the hospital's rooftop pad, and a medical team rushed out to meet them. Samuel was quickly transferred to a gurney and whisked inside, the flight medics rattling off his condition and treatment to the hospital staff. Maya followed, Ghost at her heels, until a hospital administrator stopped her at the entrance to the emergency treatment area. "I'm sorry, but dogs aren't permitted past this point," the woman explained apologetically. "And are you family of the patient?" Maya hesitated. Was she family? In some strange way, perhaps she was. "It's complicated," she admitted, "but this dog belongs to him, and I'm the only person here who knows the full situation." The administrator looked at Ghost, who was sitting calmly but watching the doors through which Samuel had disappeared with obvious concern. "There's a family waiting room just down that hallway," she finally said. "You can wait there, and I'll see about getting you updates. The dog can stay with you as long as he's controlled." "Thank you," Maya said simply, too tired to argue for more. The waiting room was empty at this late hour. Maya sank into a chair, Ghost settling at her feet with a deep sigh. For the first time in hours, she allowed herself to properly feel the exhaustion, the cold that had seeped into her bones, and the emotional weight of everything that had transpired. She must have dozed off because she startled awake when Ghost suddenly stood, his tail wagging. A doctor in surgical scrubs was approaching, clipboard in hand. "Ms. Winters?" he asked, consulting his notes. "You came in with Samuel Edwards?" Maya nodded, quickly standing. "How is he?" "Stable, but in serious condition," the doctor replied. "Hypothermia, pneumonia developing in both lungs, malnutrition, and some infected abrasions from restraints." His expression turned grim. "The sheriff's deputy mentioned possible imprisonment and abuse?" "Yes," Maya confirmed. "His nephew held him captive in a remote cabin for months, trying to force him to reveal the location of valuable documents." The doctor shook his head in disbelief. "Well, he's receiving treatment now. We've got him warming slowly, antibiotics for the pneumonia, and fluids for dehydration. He's asleep, but he was briefly conscious and asked about someone named Ghost." At the sound of his name, Ghost's ears perked up. Maya smiled slightly. "This is Ghost. He belongs to Samuel. He escaped somehow and found me, led me back to rescue Samuel." The doctor looked at the husky with newfound respect. "Remarkable animal." He hesitated, then added, "Mr. Edwards also mentioned Caroline Winter. He seemed quite emotional about it." Maya took a deep breath. "Caroline Winter was my grandmother. Apparently, she and Samuel were involved before he went to Vietnam. He was reported killed in action but was actually a POW. By the time he returned years later, she was gone." The doctor's expression softened. "A sad story, but perhaps some closure now, even if your grandmother has passed." Maya nodded, thinking of the documents in her pocket, the physical proof of a connection that had endured a half-century of separation. "When can I see him?" she asked. "He'll be in ICU for at least 24 hours, the doctor explained. "Visiting is restricted to family, but under the circumstances." He glanced down at Ghost, who was watching him intently. "I think we can make an exception tomorrow morning, once he's more stable. For now, you should get some rest yourself." As if on cue, the hospital doors slid open, and the sheriff's deputy entered, accompanied by a uniformed sheriff. They spotted Maya and approached. "Captain Winters," the deputy greeted her. "This is Sheriff Taylor. We'd like to get your official statement about tonight's events when you're ready." Maya straightened, pushing aside her exhaustion. "Of course." The sheriff, an older man with a weathered face and shrewd eyes, nodded respectfully. "We've secured the suspect, Victor Edwards. He's being treated for his burns under guard, then he'll be formally charged. The initial charges include kidnapping, false imprisonment, animal cruelty, assault, and attempted murder based on your account and the evidence at the scene. There are also the mining claim documents," Maya remembered, reaching into her pocket. "Samuel said these were what Victor was after. They prove ownership of valuable mineral rights." She handed the yellowed papers to the sheriff, who examined them briefly before placing them in an evidence bag. "We'll have these authenticated. They could establish motive." He looked at Maya appraisingly. "You mentioned your grandmother was Caroline Winter, one of the names on these documents?" Maya nodded. "Yes, I just learned about the connection tonight. Samuel and my grandmother apparently owned the claim jointly before he went to Vietnam in 1968. The sheriff's eyebrows rose. "Sam Edwards. I thought the name sounded familiar. There was quite a story about him back in the day. Declared dead in Vietnam, then turned up alive years later. By then, his fiancée had left town." He shook his head. "Small world." "Fiancée?" Maya repeated, the word landing like a physical impact. "They were engaged?" The sheriff nodded. "If it's the same, Sam Edwards. Town history before my time, but my father was sheriff back then. He used to tell the story." Another piece of the puzzle fell into place. Not just a romance, but an engagement, broken by the cruelty of war and mistaken death notifications. Maya thought again of her grandmother, living alone all those years in her cabin, never speaking of this part of her past. "Captain Winters," the sheriff said, bringing her back to the present, "we can take your statement tomorrow after you've rested. You look dead on your feet, if you don't mind my saying." Maya managed a tired smile. Thank you. I am pretty exhausted. Do you have a place to stay in town? The deputy asked. Your cabin is quite a ways out, and with everything that's happened, Maya hadn't considered that. Her grandmother's cabin was indeed too far to reach tonight, especially in her current state. There's a motel across from the hospital that allows pets, the sheriff offered, glancing at Ghost. Deputies use it when we need to stay close to the hospital for a case. I can arrange a room. That would be appreciated, Maya acknowledged, suddenly overwhelmed by the thought of a hot shower and real bed. While the deputy made the arrangements, Maya found herself wondering about something the sheriff had mentioned. You said my grandmother left town after Samuel was reported killed. Do you know where she went? The sheriff considered this. Not specifically. Left in the early 70s, from what I understand. Came back about 20 years ago and bought that cabin of hers. Kept to herself mostly. 20 years. Her grandmother had returned to the area where she'd once been engaged, living as a recluse in a remote cabin. Had she been looking for closure? Or perhaps, on some level, still hoping? The deputy returned with information about the motel room and Ghost's leash, which someone had retrieved from Maya's pack. Maya thanked them both, promised to come to the station the next day to give her statement, and followed the deputy's directions to the motel across the street. The room was basic but clean. A double bed, small bathroom, television she had no intention of watching. Ghost inspected the space thoroughly before settling on the carpet beside the bed, clearly exhausted but unwilling to fully relax his vigilance. It's okay, Maya told him, kneeling to stroke his head. We're safe now. Samuel is getting help. The dog's blue eyes studied her, so full of intelligence and emotion that it was hard to remember he wasn't human. Maya had never been particularly sentimental about animals before, but Ghost had broken through barriers she'd thought impenetrable. After a hot shower that washed away the smoke, sweat, and woodland grime, Maya collapsed onto the bed. Despite her physical exhaustion, her mind continued to race with everything she'd learned. Samuel and her grandmother, the mining claim, the lost decades. Ghost eventually jumped up beside her, curling against her side. The warmth and steady presence of the animal provided unexpected comfort, and Maya found herself telling him what she was thinking, as if he could understand. I wonder if she ever knew he survived, she murmured, scratching behind Ghost's ears. Or if she died still believing he was lost in Vietnam. Ghost sighed deeply, resting his head on her arm. My tough, independent grandmother was actually engaged once, had a whole life planned. Maya stared at the ceiling. Then war took it all away. An unexpected parallel struck her. Her own military service had changed her trajectory too, had left her scarred both physically and emotionally. She'd come to her grandmother's cabin seeking isolation, just as Caroline had decades before. History repeating, she whispered, and Ghost licked her hand once, as if in agreement or consolation. Sleep finally claimed her, deep and dreamless for the first time in months. Morning brought clarity and renewed purpose. Maya woke to Ghost, standing alert by the motel room door, his posture indicating he was ready to go. The events of the previous night felt almost surreal in the morning light, but the documents now secured as evidence, and the dog watching her expectantly confirmed it had all been real. After a quick breakfast at the diner next door, Maya headed to the sheriff's station to give her formal statement. The process was straightforward. The sheriff and a detective recorded her account of finding Ghost, following him to the cabin, discovering Samuel, and the confrontation with Victor. They seemed particularly interested in the mining claim documents and the connection to her grandmother. Those claims could be worth a substantial amount, the detective commented, especially with new extraction technologies, a strong motive for Victor Edwards' actions. How is Samuel doing today? Maya asked when they'd finished taking her statement. Stable, from what we've heard, the sheriff replied. The hospital said you can visit him later this morning. We've already taken his preliminary statement from his hospital bed. His account matches yours completely. And Victor? The sheriff's expression hardened, lawyered up immediately. But with the evidence we have, plus both your statements and those documents, he's facing serious charges. The district attorney is already involved. Maya nodded, satisfied that justice would be served. Her thoughts turned to Samuel and the extraordinary connection he represented to her grandmother's past. I'd like to visit Samuel now, if that's possible. Of course, the sheriff said, standing to end the interview. And Captain Winters, thank you for what you did. Not everyone would have gotten involved the way you did. Maya glanced down at Ghost, who had been permitted to stay with her during the interview. I can't take the credit. This guy did the hard part. The sheriff smiled. Smart animal. Reminds me of a saying my grandfather had, God sends help in mysterious forms to those who deserve it. Maya wasn't particularly religious, but after the events of the past days, she couldn't entirely dismiss the sentiment. Perhaps there was something more than coincidence at work in Ghost finding her specifically. At the hospital, Maya was directed to the ICU where Samuel had been moved overnight. Ghost walked calmly at her side, drawing curious but mostly approving looks from the hospital staff. Someone had evidently authorized the dog's presence, as no one attempted to stop them. Samuel's room was quiet except for the soft beeping of monitoring equipment. The elderly man looked frail against the white hospital sheets, oxygen tubes in his nose, and an IV in his arm, but his color was better than the previous night. His eyes were closed, but they opened as Ghost whined softly in greeting. "Ghost," Samuel whispered, his face lighting with relief. His gaze shifted to Maya, and a different emotion filled his weathered features. Wonder, perhaps, or bittersweet recognition. "Maya, you look so much like her." Maya moved to his bedside, Ghost settling immediately beside the bed, his chin resting on the mattress near Samuel's hand. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Better, thanks to you and this brave boy." Samuel's fingers found Ghost's fur, stroking weakly. "The doctors say you saved my life. Ghost deserves the credit," Maya replied, sitting in the chair beside the bed. "He found me, led me to you." Samuel's eyes grew distant. "Always knew he was special. Victor thought he'd killed him when he ran off. Miracle he found you." His gaze sharpened again, studying Maya's face. "You have her eyes. Same determination." Maya took a deep breath. "The sheriff told me you and my grandmother were engaged before Vietnam." Samuel closed his eyes briefly, pain crossing his features that had nothing to do with physical wounds. "Yes, had it all planned out. Small wedding in spring of '69. House in town. Family eventually." He opened his eyes again, looking at Maya. "Then I went to serve my country. Got shot down over Laos. They told her I was killed in action." "But you weren't," Maya prompted gently. Samuel shook his head slightly. "POW for years. Not on any official lists because we weren't supposed to be in Laos. When I finally made it home in '73, Caroline was gone. Nobody knew where." "And the mining claim?" Maya asked. "We'd bought it together, right before I left. Investment in our future. Caroline put up most of the money, inheritance from her parents. I carried the papers with me to Vietnam, thought it would be safer. When I was shot down, I had them in a waterproof pouch." His voice grew weaker, the effort of talking clearly taxing his strength. "After I came home, the claim was all I had left of her. Couldn't bring myself to sell it." Maya reached out hesitantly, then took his frail hand in hers. "My grandmother came back to this area about 20 years ago. Bought a cabin in the woods and lived there until she died last year." Samuel's fingers tightened around hers. 20 years? She was here? All that time? His voice broke. "I never stopped looking. How could I not have found her? She kept to herself," Maya explained gently. "Used her maiden name, Winter. Most people in town probably didn't make the connection." A tear slipped from the corner of Samuel's eye. "So close. All those years. So close." Ghost whined softly, pressing his nose against Samuel's hand, as if offering comfort. The gesture seemed to help, as Samuel took a steadying breath. "The sheriff has the mining claim documents now," Maya told him. "They're evidence against Victor." Samuel nodded weakly. "Good, that's good." He looked at her directly. "Half that claim belongs to Caroline's heirs. To you, I'd guess." Maya hadn't thought that far ahead. The idea of inheriting part of a potentially valuable mining claim seemed surreal compared to the human story unfolding before her. "Let's not worry about that now," she said. "You need to focus on getting better." Samuel managed a faint smile. "Been holding on to those documents for 50 years. Suddenly they don't seem so important anymore." He looked down at Ghost, then back at Maya. "Finding you, Caroline's granddaughter, that's the real treasure." Maya felt an unexpected tightness in her throat. She'd come to her grandmother's cabin seeking isolation, a place to nurse her own wounds away from the world. Instead, she'd been drawn into this extraordinary story of love interrupted by war, of connections that somehow survived half a century of separation. "I'd like to hear more about you and my grandmother," she said. "When you're stronger." Samuel's eyes brightened. "I'd like that. So many stories to tell." His gaze drifted to Ghost. "And I owe this boy my life. Both our lives." Ghost's tail thumped against the floor, as if he understood. A nurse entered, checking Samuel's vitals and adjusting his IV. "You should rest, Mr. Edwards," she advised kindly but firmly. "You can visit with your family later." Maya didn't correct the assumption. In some strange way, perhaps they were family now, connected by Ghost, by her grandmother's memory, by the shared experience of the previous night. "I'll come back this afternoon," she promised, standing to leave. "Can Ghost stay with you for a while? He seems determined to keep watch." Samuel smiled, his hand still resting on the husky's head. "I'd like that very much." The nurse looked uncertain, but Ghost was behaving impeccably, sitting calmly beside the bed. "I'll check with the doctor," she conceded. "But if he stays, he needs to remain quiet and not interfere with treatment." "He understands," Samuel said with complete confidence. "Smartest dog I've ever known." As if to prove the point, Ghost settled onto the floor beside the bed, his posture alert but relaxed, clearly intending to stay. Maya bent to scratch behind his ears. "I'll be back soon," she told him, and Ghost blinked those intelligent blue eyes once in acknowledgement. As she left the hospital, Maya found herself at a crossroads, both literally and figuratively. To her right lay the road back to her grandmother's isolated cabin, the solitude she had sought when arriving in Pinecrest. To her left, the sheriff's station, the town, connections and complications. For a moment, she stood still, considering. The events of the past few days had shifted something fundamental within her. The walls she'd built since her medical discharge felt less necessary, less protective and more restrictive. With sudden clarity, Maya turned left, toward town. There was a story here she needed to understand. Her grandmother's story, Samuel's story, and now, somehow, her own story woven together with theirs. And there was Ghost, who had found her for reasons she still didn't fully comprehend. Isolation could wait. For now, there were connections to explore, bridges to build rather than walls. As she walked toward town, Maya felt lighter than she had in months, perhaps years. The winter sun broke through the clouds, illuminating the snow-covered mountains surrounding Pinecrest, no longer a prison of solitude but a landscape of possibility. 3 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Samuel's health improved steadily under proper medical care, though his age and the ordeal he had endured meant recovery would be slow. Maya visited daily, often bringing books or simply sitting beside his bed, listening to stories of her grandmother's youth, and the love they had shared before war tore them apart. Ghost divided his time between them, keeping faithful watch at Samuel's hospital bedside during visiting hours, then returning to Maya's grandmother's cabin each night. The husky's wounds had healed completely, revealing a handsome animal with unusual markings and those distinctive steel blue eyes that seemed to see more than any dog should. Victor remained in custody, denied bail due to the severity of the charges and what the judge called a demonstrated willingness to commit violence for financial gain. The mining claim documents had been authenticated, confirming the equal partnership between Samuel Edwards and Caroline Winter, dated 1968. A preliminary assessment suggested the mineral rights could indeed be worth millions with modern extraction methods. Maya found herself surprisingly unbothered by the potential inheritance. The human connection, discovering this piece of her grandmother's history, felt far more valuable than any gold that might lie beneath the mountains. On a crisp morning in early March, Maya drove Samuel from the hospital to her grandmother's cabin. He had been released into her care, still requiring rest but well enough to leave medical supervision. Ghost rode in the back seat, his excitement evident as they traveled the snow-laden road toward the remote property. "Caroline lived here?" Samuel asked as the cabin came into view, his voice thick with emotion. "For almost 20 years, Maya confirmed, parking beside the rustic structure. "It's where I found Ghost that night." Samuel turned to look at the husky in the back seat. Remarkable. Of all the places he could have gone for help, Maya had thought the same thing many times over the past weeks. The coincidence seemed too perfect, too deliberate somehow. Ghost had somehow known to seek her specifically, had led her directly to Samuel, creating a connection that had remained severed for 50 years. She helped Samuel from the car, supporting him as they made their way to the cabin porch. Ghost bounded ahead, surprisingly energetic for an animal who had been so gravely injured such a short time ago. At the door he waited, looking back expectantly. "I've been staying here since I found it in my grandmother's will," Maya explained as she unlocked the door. "It needed some work, but it's comfortable." Samuel paused at the threshold, drawing a deep breath. "May I?" he asked, a gentleman from another era. "Of course," Maya replied, understanding his hesitation. This had been Caroline's space, her sanctuary. Entering it was a form of communion with her memory. Ghost led the way inside, immediately settling by the fireplace as if he'd lived there all his life. Maya helped Samuel to the comfortable armchair by the window, where sunlight streamed in, illuminating dust motes in the air. "It feels like her," Samuel said quietly, his weathered hands resting on the chair arms. "Simple, practical, but with touches of beauty." He nodded toward a small vase of dried wildflowers on the mantel. Maya prepared tea in the kitchen, giving Samuel a moment of privacy as he absorbed the space where Caroline had spent her final years. When she returned with the steaming mugs, she found him gazing at a photograph on the side table, Caroline in her 60s, standing proudly on the cabin porch. "She was still beautiful," he murmured, touching the frame gently. "I wish I'd known about your history while she was alive," Maya said, setting down the tea. "She never spoke about you, never mentioned being engaged before Vietnam." Samuel nodded sadly. "The grief must have been too great when you believe someone died in war." He trailed off, looking out the window at the snow-covered landscape. "I understand her silence." Ghost padded over, resting his head on Samuel's knee as if sensing his melancholy. The elderly man scratched behind the dog's ears absently. The sheriff mentioned something interesting yesterday, Maya said, changing the subject. They've been investigating Victor's finances as part of building their case. Apparently, he's been nearly bankrupt for years, desperate for money. That's what drove him to such extremes over the mining claim. Samuel sighed. Victor was always reckless with money. His father, my brother, was the same way. The idea that there might be gold for the taking must have seemed like his salvation. He shook his head. Greed is a powerful force. The DA says he'll likely face a significant prison sentence, especially given your age and the premeditated nature of his actions. I take no pleasure in that, Samuel said quietly. He's still my nephew despite what he did. I only wish he had asked for help instead of resorting to all that. Maya was struck by the compassion in his voice. After months of imprisonment, abuse, and nearly dying from neglect, Samuel still found room for empathy toward his captor. It spoke to a character forged in harder times, tempered by war and loss, yet still fundamentally decent. Ghost suddenly lifted his head, ears perked toward the rear of the cabin. He rose, trotting toward the back door with purpose. "What is it, boy?" Maya asked, following him. Ghost pawed at the door, looking up at her expectantly. "He wants to show you something," Samuel suggested from his chair. Ghost always has his reasons. Maya opened the door, and Ghost immediately darted out into the snow, looking back to ensure she followed. Curious, she grabbed her coat from the hook and stepped outside. "I'll be right back," she called to Samuel. Ghost seems to have an agenda. The husky led her around the side of the cabin, toward a small storage shed Maya had barely noticed during her time there. Unlike the cabin, which she had thoroughly cleaned and organized, the shed remained untouched, its contents a mystery she hadn't yet explored. Ghost sat before the shed door, looking pointedly at the rusted padlock securing it. "You want me to open this?" Maya asked, feeling only slightly ridiculous for speaking to a dog as if expecting a response. After everything they'd been through, it seemed natural. Ghost's tail wagged once in apparent confirmation. The lock was old and weathered, similar to the one that had secured Samuel's prison. Maya found the small key ring her grandmother had left with the property deed, trying several before finding one that fit. The lock opened with a protesting creak, and the shed door swung inward. Inside, the small space was filled with cardboard boxes, old gardening equipment, and tools coated in dust. Ghost moved confidently to a specific box in the corner, pawing at it insistently. Maya knelt beside the box, brushing away cobwebs. Unlike the others, this one had "personal" written in faded marker on its side. She opened it carefully, revealing stacks of old photographs, letters tied with faded ribbon, and small mementos. On top lay a small velvet box, the once rich fabric now faded and worn. With a sense of reverence, Maya opened it to find an engagement ring, a simple diamond solitaire set in gold, old-fashioned but timeless. She kept it, Maya whispered, understanding immediately what she had found. Ghost whined softly, nosing at the box as if encouraging her to look deeper. Beneath the ring box were photographs, Samuel and Caroline in their youth, smiling, happy, in love. Letters postmarked 1968 from Vietnam, written in a strong masculine hand. And at the very bottom, a newspaper clipping. "Local soldier killed in action," with Samuel's young face staring out from the yellowed page. Ghost watched as Maya carefully examined each item, tears filling her eyes. Her grandmother had kept everything, preserved these memories for decades, even after returning to Pinecrest. She had never forgotten, never truly moved on from the love she had lost to war. "How did you know this was here?" Maya asked Ghost, who tilted his head as if the question made little sense. She gathered the most significant items, the ring, a few photographs, one letter, and carefully closed the box, planning to return for a more thorough examination later. Back inside the cabin, she found Samuel dozing in the armchair, the warmth and emotion of the day having exhausted him. Maya quietly placed the items on the coffee table, then went to prepare lunch, leaving Ghost to his self-appointed duty of watching over the sleeping man. When Samuel woke an hour later, his gaze immediately fell on the objects Maya had retrieved. His hand trembled as he reached for the engagement ring. "She kept it," he echoed Maya's earlier words, voice breaking. "All these years, she never forgot you," Maya said gently, setting a bowl of soup beside him. "The shed is full of memories she preserved." Samuel opened the velvet box, staring at the ring that represented all they had planned, all they had lost. "I looked for her for years after I came home, hired private investigators, followed every lead. She seemed to have vanished. She changed her name back to Winter after you were reported killed," Maya explained. "Moved away, started fresh, at least on the surface, but she kept everything that reminded her of you." Ghost settled beside Samuel's chair, a comforting presence as the elderly man absorbed this bittersweet revelation. Maya gave him space to process, busying herself around the cabin. Eventually, Samuel spoke again. I came back to Pinecrest 15 years ago, after retiring. Thought maybe being close to where we'd been happy might bring some peace. He shook his head in wonder. We were here, in the same small town, all that time, never knowing. Life has strange patterns, Maya reflected, sitting across from him. I never expected to find a connection to my grandmother's past when I came here. I was just looking for solitude, a place to heal. Samuel studied her face. From your time in service? The sheriff mentioned you were injured. Maya nodded, her hand unconsciously touching the scar that ran along her jawline. IED in Afghanistan. 8 of us in the convoy. Only 3 survived. Medical discharge. PTSD. The usual story. No story of war is usual to the one who lived it, Samuel said quietly. I still dream of the prison camp sometimes, after 50 years. They sat in companionable silence, 2 soldiers from different wars, different eras, yet united by their experiences. Ghost moved between them, offering his solid presence to each in turn. What will you do now? Samuel finally asked. About the cabin? The mining claim? Everything? Maya had been considering this question for days. The cabin feels like home already, she admitted. I think I'll stay, at least for a while. As for the claim, legally, half belongs to me as my grandmother's heir. The other half is yours. At my age, what would I do with a gold mine? Samuel smiled wryly. I came back to Pinecrest to be close to memories. Found more than I ever expected. Maya hesitated, then voiced the idea that had been forming since Samuel's release from the hospital. There's plenty of room here. This cabin was meant for a family originally. You could stay, if you wanted to. Samuel looked surprised, then deeply moved by the offer. You'd want an old man cluttering up your space? With all my stories and set in my ways habits? I think we could manage. Maya smiled. Besides, Ghost seems to have adopted us both. Would be a shame to make him choose. As if understanding, Ghost barked once, tail wagging emphatically. Hard to argue with that logic. Samuel chuckled, then grew serious. I'd be honored to stay, Maya. To live in Caroline's home. To get to know her granddaughter. His eyes grew distant, almost like having a piece of her back. The decision felt right, as if the cabin had always been meant to house both of them. 2 wounded warriors from different generations, brought together by a remarkable dog and the echo of a love that had endured despite everything. In the weeks that followed, they fell into a comfortable routine. Samuel's strength returned gradually, and he spent hours telling Maya stories of her grandmother's youth, filling in pieces of family history she had never known. Maya found herself opening up as well, sharing memories of her military service, both the pride and the pain, with someone who truly understood. Ghost remained their constant companion, dividing his attention equally between them. The husky seemed to have appointed himself guardian of them both, alert to their needs, present in their moments of darkness. The mining claim was eventually settled without court involvement. Maya and Samuel agreed to lease the mineral rights to a responsible company with strict environmental protections in place. The resulting income would be more than either of them needed, and they decided together that a substantial portion would go to charities supporting veterans and rescue animals. Spring arrived in the mountains, melting the snow and revealing new growth beneath. Maya began renovating the cabin, fixing the roof, updating the plumbing, adding a ramp for Samuel's easier access. What had begun as a temporary refuge was transforming into a permanent home, a place of healing for both of them. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in purples and deep blues, they sat on the porch watching Ghost explore the newly thawed yard. Samuel held one of Caroline's photographs, his weathered finger tracing her young face. Sometimes I think Ghost was her way of bringing us together, he said softly. Too many coincidences otherwise. Him finding you specifically, leading you to me, knowing about the shed where she kept our memories. Maya had had similar thoughts, though her military training had conditioned her to look for rational explanations. You think my grandmother somehow arranged this? From beyond? Samuel smiled. I think love leaves an imprint on the world. Caroline and I never had our chance in life. Perhaps the universe found a way to balance that, through you. Ghost trotted back to the porch, settling between their chairs as if claiming his rightful place in their unlikely family unit. Whatever brought us here, Maya said, reaching down to stroke the husky's fur. I'm grateful for it. I came to this cabin looking for isolation, a place to lick my wounds in private. Instead, I found connections I never expected. We both did, Samuel agreed, his hand joining hers on Ghost's head. 2 old soldiers and 1 extraordinary dog, brought together by fate or fortune or whatever you want to call it. That night, for the first time since her medical discharge, Maya slept through the night without nightmares, without waking in cold sweat from memories of exploding metal and screaming comrades. Ghost lay at the foot of her bed, his steady presence an anchor in the darkness. In the guest room that was now Samuel's, the elderly veteran slept with a photograph of Caroline on his nightstand, and her engagement ring beside it. His dreams, for once, were not of prison camps or lost decades, but of a future he had never anticipated. Peaceful days in the home of the woman he had loved, in the company of her granddaughter, and a dog who had somehow found them both when they needed it most. The cabin, once a place of isolation, had become filled with healing, connection, and new purpose. And as the mountain spring blossomed around them, so too did the possibility that sometimes life offers second chances in the most unexpected forms, even when they arrive 50 years later, with 4 paws and knowing blue eyes. If Maya and Ghost's journey touched your heart, consider supporting your local animal rescue or veterans organization. Heroes come in many forms, and sometimes the most profound healing happens when we reach out to others, human or animal, who need us most.